Musicians commonly describe successive harmonies as connecting to one another. For instance, we might say that a 5 chord progresses to a tonic that comes after it, or that the 5 chord resolves to or leads to a tonic that comes right after it. This indeed is one of the central metaphors that we use in describing tonal music. However, successive harmonies don't always seem to connect. For instance, when it appears at a half cadence, a dominant chord is generally understood to end a harmonic progression. Thus, with a half cadence, a 5 does not progress to the chord that comes after it. Rather, after the 5 chord, there's a disconnection, a separation, or closing off, or an interruption. Consider the passage shown in example 1. I assume most of you would agree that the dominant harmony, measure 7, could be described as connecting to the tonic of measure 8. On the other hand, the half-cadential dominant in measure 4 seems separated from the subdominant chord that directly follows it. And indeed, this voice leading break helps explain this otherwise odd harmonic succession of a 5 chord followed by a 4 chord. As we listen to this passage, notice how the metaphors of a harmonic disconnection and connection so effectively fit the highlighted dominant chords of bars 4 and 7, respectively. After the first 5, we'd say it's followed by a disconnection, and the second one progresses to the one that comes after it. And a sense of tonal break that follows a dominant chord may arise even when the half-cadential dominant is immediately followed by a tonic. And by the way, if you need handouts, people, we have some extra handouts over here. Okay. But anyway, the sense of a tonal break that follows a dominant chord can arise even when the half-cadential dominant is immediately followed by the tonic, as shown in example 2. In example 2, you'll notice that there are 2 5-1 successions. The first 5-1 succession appears in measures 4 to 5, and the next one in measures 7 to 8. Though owing to the features of the texture, rhythm, and form, surely most people would agree that the 5 chord of measure 4 is best described as part of a half cadence, so that it ends a harmonic progression and is disconnected from the tonic chord of measure 5. This is unlike what happens with the 5 chord of measure 7, which surely is best described as lying in the middle of a phrase and is connecting to the tonic of measure 8 as part of an authentic cadence. As we listen, note the sense of the contrast between the connection and disconnection associated with these 2 5-1 successions. Oops, sorry. And now something similar may be witnessed in example 3. Though here, there are 16th notes that lead from the dominant chord of measure 4 to the tonic chord of measure 5, yet nonetheless, certainly the dominant chord in measure 4 is best understood as part of a half-cadential conclusion of a harmonic progression, which is essentially separated from the tonic that immediately follows. And this contrasts greatly with what happens with the dominant chord of measure 7, which seems strongly connected to the tonic that comes after it. Now, the analytic observations I've been making are rather commonplace, so commonplace that we might forget that they're merely characterizations. That is, things such as cadences, harmonic resolutions, tonal interruptions. These are characterizations. Important ones, yes, but they're characterizations nonetheless. Thus, when we analyze something as a half cadence or we analyze a break in the voice leading, we're not making empirical observations. We're making rather metaphorical interpretations. Now, although metaphorical, interpreting the presence of a cadence or a voice leading break or connection, these things can have a huge impact on both analysis and performance. Consider the following rendition by Nelson Freire of the excerpt shown in example 4a. Okay. As you'll hear, through various nuances, Freire separates the 5 of the half cadence, which I circle in example 4a, and he separates this 5 from the tonic that immediately follows. He treats this half cadential dominant much differently than he does the 5 of the authentic cadence in example 4b, which I circle in the second staff of example 4b. Okay. In the authentic cadence, Freire seems to reinforce the connection of the 5 to the tonic that comes right after it. So as we listen, notice how differently Freire treats the dominants that are circled in examples 4a and b, respectively. There was a little break after that 5. Now 4b. That 5 went right into the 1. At least in the manner that Freire played it. But performers don't always have to underline such harmonic connections and disconnections in their renditions. Notice, for instance, how differently Alfred Cortot performs the same passages that we just heard. Unlike Freire, Cortot seems to counter the prevailing metaphors by downplaying the disconnection following the half cadence, and likewise downplaying the connection between the 5 and 1 of the authentic cadence. So we'll hear the same things again, now played by Cortot. Oh, darn, hold on. Let's oh, something went wrong there. What?
The sound's going to
What? The sound got messed up here. Yeah.
Try taking the plug in and out and just checking.
Let me just try.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
What's the previous example? Is the previous one playing all right?
The previous one played all right.
Try it again and see. See if it will come through from the previous one.
Perhaps it's just the beginning, which was...
Yeah, it might just be a funny...
Yeah,
Try
probably this is just the beginning, which is...
Let it play on from that
That,
one.
that's Freire.
Just leave it running and see if it'll
Okay.
run in.
Yeah.
If not, I'll have a CD.
Let's see if it'll do.
For some reason, it's not
no,
playing.
No, it's going to play, I'm sure. This is just the beginning.
No,
No?
something went wrong.
Corrupted, yeah.
You just have to trust me, unfortunately. it's always a pleasure to hear Cortot, of course. But if you heard Cortot, he when he get to the half cadence 5, he drove right into the tonic. And when he got to the authentic cadence, he paused right after the 5 and left a little gap before the 1 that came after it. I think for inches of time, you just have to trust me on this. But if people know Cortot's playing, you know he does this quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of his little things, yeah?
Are we permitted to comment?
Yeah,
This is a cycle that I've played over 150 times in public.
yes,
If I may give a pianist's perspective on this.
yes,
All these diminuendo, crescendo, ritornando,
Yeah.
the rest of it, are very relative to one's technical level, because they're so fantastically difficult that
Yeah.
the rubatos taken are relative to the size of the hands and to the ability of one's agility of the instrument.
yeah.
So I don't think any of these people, knowing pianists as I do, have any notion of this theoretical stuff.
Yeah. Well, whether you don't think Freire knew that there was a half cadence here, or that Courteau was aware that there was the end of a phrase?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, yes. And they were chosen, they chose, and they have the technical ability, those
Not
pianists.
Courteau, I'm afraid.
What? Not Courteau?
At all.
Not,
Not at all. He's one of the worst technically gifted pianists in history.
but he was able to,
Get around it.
yeah, he was, yeah,
He got
I never
around it.
practiced.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think if he wanted to, he could have taken a little break after the half cadence,
Oh, you'll
or,
find 100
yeah.
recordings at different tempi of all this.
Sure,
It's
yeah.
extraordinary.
Is it relevant to say that Courteau was a good friend of Fauré, of course, and played and did a lot of his music. Now, there are some recordings of Fauré playing things like his nocturnes, and he's a very interesting tendency to drive through cadences, really quite strong cadences, big cadences.
Yes.
He'll wait before them, and then when he's getting to the cadence, he'll suddenly push through it. There's like stretching an elastic. I'm wondering whether Courteau is aware of this.
Yeah.
I think he might be.
Oh, I'm forgetting now. There's something on the internet where a famous composer, plays his own pieces, and he tends to drive through the cadences, or pause, right? Something similar to what I was saying Courteau does.
It
And
just
that-
doesn't take time where you'd expect,
Yeah.
and it backs up things like that comma.
Yeah.
in
And-
the tempo.
And then sometimes you'll hear sometimes more modern pianists tend to play more like Freire all the time. That is, you'll see that the composer is tended to brush aside the cadences, or at least have that option, whereas maybe some modern performers try to play it always, according to the
But
rule.
try not to underline the obvious, not sweeping it.
Yes. But no matter how one plays it, I think one would agree that there's a half cadence in 4A and an authentic cadence in 4B. That is, the underlying status of the cadences in these excerpts are not substantially changed how someone plays them. That is, whenever dealing with a clear harmonic connection or disconnection, performers can choose to underline the prevailing sense or else to counteract it. Analysis can help us determine cadential status, but analysis can't directly dictate how players should perform them. But sometimes analysis can't even tell us what the cadential status is, at least not by looking at the score. That is, sometimes, unlike in the passage we just heard, there are strong contradictory signals in the score, so that the ultimate determination of what type of cadence we're dealing with, or where the cadence is, lies entirely in the hands of the performers. In this regard, consider the passage shown in example 5. Okay? Notice especially the passage that I circle in between in between measures 5 and 6. Is there a half cadence in measure 5, followed by a break in the voice leading and a new progression starting in measure 6? Or does the phrase end with an elided authentic cadence in measure 6, in which case the dominant chord of measure 5 would be regarded as connecting to the tonic that comes after it? Now, looking at the printed page alone, one could provide good reasons for either interpretation. The conflicting signals here are so strong that arguably different acceptable performances of this passage might give rise to different hearings of the passage. Consider the following renditions of this excerpt by the Aeolian Quartet, the Buchberger Quartet, and the Kodai Quartet, respectively. Note particularly how each performs the measures circled in example 5, and which, if any of these, do you think suggest a voice-leading break following the arrival of the dominant chord in measure 5, which suggests a voice-leading connection between the 5 and 1 in measures 5 and 6, and which suggests a little bit of both. And now I hope this works, otherwise we'll have to.
Goodness.
it's fallacious to argue that a proper analysis of the score could in each case determine whether a performer should play adjacent harmonies as connected or disconnected. After all, if the status of the cadence is obvious, then the status is going to be obvious regardless of how the cadence is played. On the other hand, in cases where the performance can affect how the cadence is understood, this would suggest that one cannot rightly analyze the location and type of cadence simply by examining the printed page. Now, I emphasize this because various music scholars have attempted to formulate some strict guidelines to determine the presence and type of cadences. Now, it's helpful at times to come up with loose preference rules in this regard. Problems arise, however, if these guidelines and preference rules are taken too seriously, as though the presence or absence of a certain lone element on the printed page can automatically determine this matter. Such a strict attitude would wrongly treat the sense of harmonic endings and connections and disconnections as though they were technical features of the score, rather than metaphorical impressions based on a conglomeration of factors. And this attitude in turn can unnecessarily restrain performance options. Now, in the remainder of this presentation, I'll examine one such guideline for determining cadences. Namely, I'll examine the widespread notion among some music theorists that a half cadence cannot be established in 18th century music by a dominant seventh chord. And this guideline has been espoused by a number of prominent music theorists in recent years, to the extent that some people take it for granted, at least as far as 18th century music is concerned. And as a general preference rule, it makes sense to say that a 5/7 is unlikely to establish a half cadence. After all, a 5/7 is unstable, and thus is less likely to be heard as a convincing harmonic endpoint. Less likely, but not impossible. I mean, what if there's a number of other features that suggest that a 5/7, despite its unstable nature, may be fruitfully described as an endpoint that seems harmonically disconnected from what follows it? In such cases, why should we allow a signal technical feature from prevent us from applying such a metaphor? Now, a large majority of half cadences are established by root position 5 triads. Nevertheless, in a number of instances, we can find a 5/7 that can convincingly be characterized as marking a half-cadential conclusion of a formal melodic and harmonic unit, followed by a tonal interruption. For instance, let's consider the 5/7 chords that are circled in the passages cited in example 6. Okay. In each of these, we have a 5/7 that seems to establish a half cadence. Let's first look at example 6a. In this excerpt, a 5/7 in F minor appears at the end of an exposition, and this 5/7 doesn't resolve to F as one might expect, but rather is followed by a pause and then by a sudden plunge into the key of A flat major. And surely the 5/7 here could be fairly described as a half cadential ending that's disconnected from the harmony that directly ensues. Notice this as we listen to this passage from 6a. Now, something similar happens in 6b. Here, at the end of a trio section by Haydn, a 5/6/5 of F is directly followed by a tonic chord of E flat that starts at the da capo of a menuetto. Despite its instability, this 5/6/5 of F seems like a harmonic endpoint that's disconnected from the harmony that comes after it. I'll play 6b now. And in example 6C, a 5/7 appears at the end of the first part of what may be fittingly described as a contrasting period. As with what was seen in the previous two examples, this 5/7 surely is as sturdy as what is found in many other things that are typically classified as half cadences. Examples 7 to 9 on the next pages deal with Haydn's String Quartet in D, Opus 17.5, a work that contains a number of convincing examples of half cadences established by 5/7 chords. For instance, in the passage cited in example 7, we have another piece in which a clear half cadential 5/7 appears at the end of a trio section that seems harmonically disconnected from the chord that appears at the da capo of the menuetto. This audio clip starts shortly before the passage cited in example 7. Example 7. And in the excerpt cited in example 8, a half cadential 5/7 seems to arise at the end of an antecedent within a period. And this half cadential 5/7 is highlighted by the arrow, the big arrow in example 8a. Now, those who are reluctant to accept the possibility of a half cadential 5/7 chord might read this theme in the manner shown in example 8b. Now, according to the interpretation displayed in example 8b, the 5/7 of measure 4 does not form a harmonic ending of any sort, and thus is not followed by a break in the voice leading. Rather, this 5/7 lies in the middle of a larger tonal motion, and thus it resolves to the tonic that follows in measure 5. However, I don't like this reading because I think it too blithely ignores striking elements of the passage's form, rhythm, and texture. I feel a much more convincing interpretation, a much more convincing metaphor for this passage is shown in example 8c. According to 8c, the voice leading of a sturdily pronounced 5/7 chord is interrupted in measure 4, and thus the 7th of the 5/7 doesn't resolve immediately, but rather is left hanging. The 5/7, along with its 7th, seem to be resolved only fully at the end of the theme, that is, at the end of this phrase, where there's a very prominent C to B in the melody and a tonic chord, so that there's a type of delayed resolution of that 5/7 chord in measure 4. And as a result of this delayed resolution of the 5/7, along with a very prominent emphasis on the C and B in the penultimate measure, there's a sense of a lack of complete melodic closure here. There's a lack of a complete linear descent at the end of this theme. Consider this interpretation as shown in example 8c as we listen to this passage. As a result of the half cadence in the 5/7 there, and the lack of complete linear closure there, there's a slight oddness to that theme. Okay. And this oddness seems to be corrected as the movement goes on, as it were. Like there's a type of compositional problem that Haydn addresses as the movement continues. And this I tried to show his addressing of this compositional problem in example 9, and you might open your handout so you can see both example 8 and 9 at the same time. This theme comes back at the end of the menuetto, and when it comes back, it's changed. And these changes seem to address the sort of odd issues in the theme's first appearance. For instance, look at example 9a. When this theme returns, its antecedent is extended by 4 measures, and I show this 4-measure extension in parentheses in example 9a. During this 4-bar extension, the odd unresolved 7th in the melody, heard when the theme first appeared, is led in a stepwise motion towards a more normal phrase ending. Likewise, the odd lack of melodic closure at the end of the consequent, when the theme first appeared, seems redressed by an appended passage that appears at the end of the menuetto. And I show this appended passage in parentheses in example 9b. Note that within this added passage, the first violin spells out a clear stepwise descent to tonic, one that was missing when the theme first appeared. In all, one might say that this odd half-cadential dominant 7th within the main theme's first appearance creates compositional problems that are solved, so to speak, at the end of the menuetto, so that the half-cadential 5/7 in measure 4 seems to play a crucial role in the large-scale tonal drama that governs the entire movement. Let's listen to this. First, let's listen to the theme again as it appeared at the beginning of the movement, as shown in example 8c. Now the theme's correction, so to speak, at the end of the movement in example 9. And now let's hear this whole entire minuet so we can hear these themes in context. As we listen, I'll guide you along the voice theme sketch in example 9c. I'll call it the measure numbers. 1, 5, 9, 13, 17, 21, 25, coda. So, as I've argued in the past few examples, contrary to what many have claimed, there are various passages in 18th century compositions that can be fairly characterized as ending with a half-cadential 5/7. And furthermore, recognizing the possibility of a half-cadential dominant 7th at times allows us to highlight certain structural and expressive features of the composition. But in the passages we just heard, the presence of the half cadence and the dominant 7th chords are so obvious that they would be heard as such regardless of how the passages are analyzed or played. Like in the passage we just heard, how can anybody play measure 4 that you wouldn't hear a half cadence and a break in the voice leading following that dominant 7th? But the same is not true of all passages that are more ambiguous in this regard. That as I've argued earlier, sometimes the signals of the composition seem to be at such odds with one another that the location and type of the cadence is determined largely by decisions of the performers. But if one refuses to acknowledge the possibility of a half cadence in a 5/7, then one might unnecessarily limit the performance choices in such situations. Consider the passage shown in example 10a, from the opening of Mozart's Piano Sonata in A minor, Crucial 310. Notice this particularly the passage I circle in example 10a. Does the first theme end with a half cadence and a 5/7 in measure 8, followed by a harmonic disconnection in the manner shown in example 10b? Or does the theme end in measure 9 with an elided authentic cadence, so that there's a 5-1 resolution here, as shown in example 10C. Now, I've discussed this with a lot of people, and it's clear to me that there's little consensus on this matter. Good reasons could be summoned in support of either reading, as I suggest with the text on the side of examples 10B and C, respectively. And because of these conflicting signals, whether this theme is understood as ending with a half cadence or an authentic cadence ultimately depends on how it's performed. And pianists who have recorded this passage apparently have their own opinion regarding how to interpret this phrase ending. Okay. Let's listen to a number of recordings of this passage. But first, would anyone like to play it? Just one.
It's been about 25 years, but I'll do
Oh, okay. And then I'll ask you to try it different ways. First, play it how you like it, however you choose.
For me, the greatest problem is the first B sharp.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to get into this.
You want more?
Oh, good. Okay, can you now try it? Can you play it now where you drive information 8 to 9?
Drive right through it.
Yes, just drive like you. Okay, good. Okay, and now take like a little breath after measure 8. Just try.
Drive off to measure 8.
A little teeny breath.
Well, that would reduce the tempo from the very beginning.
Oh, well, it would keep saying that. Okay, thank you.
The difference is that if you're going to make the break, you can make the fortepiano. If you're going to drive through, you have to crescendo into the forte, basically.
Well, you can't drive through it simply because when you get to the recapitulation section, you've got to drive through it.
Well, you'll see. You could play it differently. You could play it differently in recapitulation. You can play it differently the first time and the second time.
I wrote my bachelor's senior paper on this thing.
And you can have your own, and you can also have your own opinion about how to play it. But I think you'll see some people have their own. I'm now going to tell you other people's opinions. Okay.
Happy to have a go at
So what?
I'll happily have a go at that and see what happens. I might play it dreadfully bad.
Okay.
Hear what happens. I'm curious.
Okay, and that would, we'll hear just one more, and then we'll hear recorded pianists.
I didn't know what would happen.
We'll now hear some others. Okay, and you might like some of these readings better than others, but I feel it's going to be a matter of, personal opinion, yeah?
May I just interject with one thing? The last lesson I had with my teacher who recorded all of Mozart twice, Arthur Olson, many of you must know about him.
Yeah.
The last question I ever asked him was, what do you have more to tell me about the A minor Mozart? Because we'd done it for about 2 years on and off. And his answer was prodigious. He said, only God knows how to play it.
You want to sometimes
what we're dealing with here is whether to play it as Mozart, whatever that is,
yes,
or Haydn, or Bellini, or Chopin. That's the problem, essentially, when you reduce and accentuate tempi and play and fluctuate with them. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, okay. You wonder if God would imagine some of these, okay? So I'll call it, I have the names of the performers here.
I can imagine there's one of these jokes that has Mozart saying, but that's God playing it, he gets it all wrong, he's no idea.
So first, Mitsuko Uchida.
Oh, no.
first routine.
Claudio Rao. Richter.
That's the crescendo.
This is Richter.
If you drive through, you can do it. You have to crescendo to drive.
Bilson. Submersion.
Lembra mais todos? Who is this from?
Veselinova.
This is the problem.
Heidi Lowy. Oh, darn. Oh. Oh, wait, oh.
And you're going
Oh.
to leave us without
Yeah,
Corto
yeah,
again.
yeah. Heidi Lowy. Well, just. Hey, this is different than all the others, if you can believe it.
Yeah, I've got to do it.
Okay, can I do it?
How do you go?
Yeah. I'm sorry about it.
Yeah, we did it today. Yeah.
This is going to go.
Unless I can find my iPad. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
How did the CDs in? Can
The
you
CDs
find
in?
the track carefully?
Which track?
It's unfortunately, we call it like the very end, go to the last track. Can you go to the last track? Last track.
Over six feet.
Oh, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. We get to the very last one. No,
Wait, we said.
that was Veselinova. Heidi Lowy. Heidi Lowy. And Cortot.
Who's the singer that Corto's accompanying? Who's the singer that Corto's accompanying?
Now, I'll read what I said. Naturally, you may have preferred some of these readings over the others. Yet surely the analysis one prefers relates to the performance one prefers. In other words, arguably it's the preferred performance that dictates the analytic interpretation, not the other way around. On the other hand, you would unduly limit the analytic and performance options of a passage like this if you determined in advance that according to a strict rule, a dominant seventh could not possibly establish a half cadence. Again, things such as cadence, voice-leading connection, or disconnection, these are metaphorical interpretations that rightly should be based on an accumulation of features. Here, as with many other cases, if we avoid mistaking a metaphoric characterization for a technical rule, we can open up valuable options for both analysis and performance. Okay, thank you.